are going east toward between Maine and Fraser. We're going towards Fraser, and it seems to me pretty obvious, pretty much everywhere in the world, but very much in Vancouver because there were so many streams. Where was the stream here? We're approaching the bed of the stream, the bottom of the stream at Prince Edward Street, and obviously it kept going and had another stream that came down here because this is a very steep incline as well. So there were obviously two streams. They probably met up a little further down. And here's Charles Tupper High School on the right hand side. I'm just going to pull over for a moment. And if you just look over on Charles Tupper, you can see this would have been a fairly boggy area, a very flat area. And this was very often where they built schools and libraries and community centers. It was kind of the leftover that was there after the houses were built. The houses were built and then they thought, oh gee, we need a high school or we need a community center or something. And they would always look for the empty area, and usually they were the boggy areas. And this is repeated again and again and again. We're standing at the corner of King Edward and St. George's. Yeah, there was definitely a creek going the other way on St. George's, but anyway, there probably was as well this way. But there's like 5 sewer covers here, so one wonders why. Well, probably because it's the lowest point and there's a lot of water running underneath, so they had to collect it all and put it somewhere. Otherwise we'd have nice little floods here all the time. Here we are once more. There's a very large flat space, and sure enough this was the headwaters of Bridge Street Creek, what the settlers called Bridge Street Creek. What we can see in the distance is Queen Elizabeth Park. That is a basaltic flow. It's not a volcano, it's a basaltic flow, and it created it's called Little Mountain, a large hump. And there would have been lots of trees around here, lots of old growth trees, cedar, Douglas fir, Sitka spruce, hemlock, western hemlock, and they were logged in the late 19th century. It took about 30 years to get rid of most of the trees. There still are some reasonably big specimens. They would have been small little saplings when right after the logging, and they grew up, and they're now about 130 years old. They're at the foot of Queen Elizabeth Park. You can actually see a few of them from here. But anyway, so this was the headwaters of Bridge Street Creek. It started off at the eastern flank of Queen Elizabeth Park and probably collected in a big boggy area right here. And again, here we are. We have the flatlands were what's left over after the houses were built. So what you would end up with is a community center, a library, and this exactly soccer field, things like that would end up in these big square empty open spaces that were usually quite boggy. And talk to soccer players, they usually have to run around in a lot of muck because there's a lot of water in those fields, and it's hard to get rid of the water because that's where the water wants to go. So this creek went in at Canby Bridge and had a lot of salmon in it. It's hard to believe, but this was the headwaters of a major salmon creek in Vancouver. So we're on the bottom slope of Queen Elizabeth Park facing north, and there's some leftover trees here. There would have been small little saplings when right after the logging, so I guess they just got left behind and started growing into trees. So what, again, it was the late 1800s, 19th century. It took about 30 years to take away all the trees in Vancouver. Most of the trees in Vancouver were logged within the last part of the 19th century and within about 30 years. So what happened to these trees? I found out they were originally much bigger than what you see here, because this is only about 130 years of growth or so. What happened to these trees is they got pulled down by oxen. Hard to believe, but there was a road that went from here to Douglas Park, which is over in the west. And Jerry Rogers, who Jericho Beach is named after, Jerry's Cove, had a ground there where they sorted the logs, and then they would pull them down on a skid road all the way to False Creek. So they had to get them out of here and mill them and sell them. And that's where all the pulp mills were at the end of the 19th century. So False Creek was full of pulp mills at that time. So all these trees would have been taken down there. You know, if you go into the forest here a little bit deeper into the woody parts of the area, you can see some big stumps. But it's kind of neat to see these nice trees that have grown since then. I'm holding a Douglas fir. There was a big storm the other night, and some branches blew down. And when you walk through the area, it really smells wonderful. It smells like a wonderful foresty area. So this was Douglas fir. The Douglas fir tend to be the much taller ones. They grew up to 400 feet high. The biggest one clocked in Vancouver was in Kerrisdale, 415 feet. This was a temperate rainforest. They would have lived to be over 1,000 years old. Over 400 feet high was the tallest tree, but over 1,000 years old. And there were two reasons why the trees got big. One was there was a lot of water in Vancouver. It rains a lot for more than half the year. But there was another reason, and that was the soils were very well fertilized by salmon. Salmon, there were prolific streams full of salmon, and over hundreds of years, the bears and the wolves, and pretty much any other animal who would eat parts of salmon, would drag them into the forest. And so the bones of the fish would fertilize the ground. And they're called salmon forests. They're created by the bones of salmon as well. So it's amazing that happened, but that is why those trees got so big. It was not just the rain. So we live in a wonderful place. So the old streams that used to be in Vancouver, people say, well, where did they go? They didn't really go anywhere, except we put in sewer pipes, and now the water flows through sewer pipes. So all the water that runs off of roads go into sewer pipes, and all of that water goes into a water body somewhere in Vancouver. This one particular goes to False Creek, because I know it's in the False Creek Watershed. But, Brewery Inlet, False Creek, Point Grey area, Fraser River, all of the sewers in Vancouver go to some water body. So you don't want to be putting anything down the creek, the sewer, that you wouldn't want in a water body, like chemicals and any other kinds of pollutants. So what you see on the sewer covers, there's two ways that people have spoken about the fact that you shouldn't pollute city sewers. One is this way, which is actually embedded in the design. The design is embedded in the sewer cover, and it says, "Do not pollute, leads to fish habitat," and has an arrow, and there's a fish etched in the picture. The other one is the yellow fish that you see painted on the sides of the sewers, and that's usually some sort of community group that does that. So they're personally involved in actually being aware of the fact that the stream does lead to fish habitat. And this is very important, because some people just dump their paint down, they dump their chemicals. Last year there was in the Muskroom Creek area, there was somebody who decided their pool sewer system didn't work, so they decided to dump all their chlorine into the city sewer, and it killed 1,000 fish in 5 minutes. It was, people just are unaware. Unfortunately, there are people who are aware, but there still are many who are not. So we need to know these things if we want our water bodies to have life in them. So we're standing on the corner of 22nd and Columbia, and this is where Bridge Street Creek came down from Queen Elizabeth Park all the way down in Columbia, parallel to Columbia. You can see it's a little bit up on either side. And so when they were building the sidewalk here, I stopped the construction workers and said, "Did you know there was a creek here once?" And they said, "No, I didn't know." They said, "Do you have a fish stamp we could maybe put on?" Well, as it happens, I have a friend who actually did a fish stamp for sidewalks. Louise Towell from the Stream of Dreams did this beautiful fish stamp. So they put them in various corners where in the alley and on the street side. They did put a few in, but if you have creek in your neighborhood that you have a new sidewalk on and need a stamp, just give the city a call and they'll find the stamp again. And it's not a bad idea to bring back the memory of the fish that used to be on this creek. So people talk a lot about bringing back creeks. It's definitely important for us to bring some water back into our city streets. It's called depaving. You take some pavement away, you bring some water back. It's actually being done in Vancouver. We're working towards having that done in St. George's Creek area. So it's going to be a little while, but we certainly envision that happening on various streets in Vancouver, and that's a very positive thing because it takes away the water and brings it into a place it needs to go rather than just into the sewers. The water brings life to the city streets. But in terms of daylighting creeks, what we have to remember is that when the trees were cut, when the trees were clear cut, and everybody who lives in a city lives in a clear cut everywhere on earth pretty much, where there were trees, they were taken away and people came and inhabited the area. So we're talking about clear cutting an area. Once that happens, people disconnect from the natural roots of the area, and so what I think happens is our brain gets clear cut and we lose the connection we have with the wild reality around us. In order to bring that back, you have to daylight your brain. You have to daylight the thoughts that you have and bring back the consciousness of human connection to nature. So here we are in Douglas Park, again a nice big flat area. Well, sure enough, this was a beaver meadow. It was the last area left behind when all these houses were built because it was too boggy. So they left it a big field, soccer fields, playgrounds, community center. The beavers shaped the land with chopping down trees, making lakes, bringing wildfowl to come and live on the lakes. They really created some wonderful little ecosystems all around Vancouver. There's a lot of water to drain into. The water starts at the height of land there near Van Dusen, goes in pools a little bit at the Eric Hamber High School soccer field, and again a school in a big wide open area, and then the water runs down here. And actually in the winter time when it rains a lot, boy does this place really get wet, especially around the perimeter and in the field area. You can feel we're standing on a pretty boggy area. The water does flow off, but not very quickly. Yes, this was called Mackie Creek, and after one of the settlers. Mackie Creek, you know, it's funny because once in a while you see the water coming down one of the alleys. It comes pretty fast, and during a torrential downpour, and then you see it comes through here. It's in no time at all you can tell where creeks were, as I said many times. So Mackie Creek, I mean, it wasn't a particularly big creek. There's an interesting picture that I came across in the archives where it goes across Broadway, present-day Broadway, and there must have been some sort of break in the road there, and there's this huge waterfall that comes down over Broadway. So, I mean, there was a lot of water at the end of the 19th century here, and it still pretty much was a creek for the longest period of time. The other thing is that when it went in at False Creek, the height of the edges of the creek were 60 feet deep. So it's hard to believe that where the creek went into the water, but you imagine that very steep hill that comes before. So it was rushing down that hill and it cut a very deep gorge, 60 feet on either side. That was what Major Mathews said, and I would believe him totally.